We talk.
All right, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. My name is Ashley McCormick, and I'm the Director of Personalized Learning for the district. Some of you I know, I see some familiar names, but if you will, go ahead and drop in the chat and tell me how you're doing today. Are you sleepy? Are you tired? Are you good? Are you happy it's Friday? That's what I am. Gotcha. Oh, my neighbor just told me I'm a little loud. Go figure, for those of you that know me. All right. All right, so everybody, it seems like everybody is happy. Some people are very tired. Yes, I think the exhaustion by the end of the week is it's a very real thing for all of us these days. Allie, I'm eternally tired too. I am currently 28 weeks pregnant, so that is just a common state for me these days, is just tired. All right. So one of the things we're going to talk through today is we're going to talk about playlists. We're going to go in and we're going to look and analyze the playlist. We're going to talk about some next steps with playlists and things like that. I want this to be an open conversation. So as we go through, there are going to be times that I ask questions. When we do that, please feel free to either unmute yourself or to type things in the chat. And we can have an open conversation about playlists and best practices and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. If you see me looking in multiple places, it's because I'm trying to keep up with the chat and share my screen. All right. So like I said, my name is Ashley McCormick. My email address is there. So if you all have questions, comments, concerns, you can always email me. I do try to get back to people as quickly as possible. Sometimes that takes me a little longer than I would like, just because of the sheer number of people that I have that email me. So, all right. When we think about our framework for teaching and learning, when we start talking about playlists, they really fall under that domain of differentiated and personalized. We can really utilize playlists as a means to address some of those individual learning needs of our students, to allow some flexibility and pace, or to give them choice, voice and choice in how they learn. So our learning target for today is I can create effective playlists for my students. So by the end of this, I hope we have a good idea of how we can do that, or how we can support teachers in that work if you're not in a teaching role at present. What I want us to do is we're going to actually start out and we're going to look at a playlist. And so this playlist is a middle school science example. I'll throw the link this bit.ly. I'll throw it in the chat for you all. So you can either type it in from the screen, or you can copy and paste from the chat. And what it should pull up for you, if all goes well, is it should pull up a Canvas module. So if someone will drop in the chat a thumbs up or a yes if you're able to access that link, just so I'll know. Awesome. Just wanted to make sure. So today, as we go through this first activity, this is the playlist that we're going to use as our reference, okay? And I'll give you time in just a moment. I'll set a timer, and I'm going to give you time to go in and actually explore that playlist. But before we do, I wanted to give you kind of an idea of, in conjunction with this playlist, how this teacher might be running her classroom. So how might she incorporate this particular playlist with synchronous instruction, just to give you some background as we dive into our conversation today. So if you look, this teacher has an agenda. It's broken down based on a typical middle school schedule of about 55 minutes. Sometimes we get a little less, some schools get a little more, but 55 is right there. And so as you think about the activities that are embedded in the playlist, this is kind of how the flow of that class may go. Now, we have all been in the classroom at some point or another, and we know that these times are definitely tentative. It takes kids longer to get in or shorter, or some conversations spill over. So when I say tentative, that is exactly what I mean. So what I want to give you time to do before we jump into our conversation, and those of you who are just joining us, there is a bit.ly that I put in the chat, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat again, just so you have it. That's going to take you to a Canvas module that we're going to use for our conversation today. So what I want to do is I want to give you about 5 minutes to go back to that module and just click around. See what it's about, see what the students are doing, just to explore what's going on, okay? So I'm going to set a timer to keep myself on track. All right. So go ahead and take about 5 minutes and just click through there. Read the learning target, the agenda is copied again. Look at some of the activities that it's asking students to do, but just kind of click through that. And your module is your playlist here. So all of these different pages and pieces. For those of you that are just joining, we're taking a second and we're exploring this particular playlist. It's built in a Canvas module. So we've got about a little less than 3 minutes. I know there have been a couple people that have joined. For those of you that are saying you can't see what the discussion page looks like, here you go. So you don't actually have to do the discussion, just kind of look and see what it's all about. All right. Before we jump into our conversations, any clarifying questions about that particular playlist? Anything that just totally confused you? There may have been some links or things like that that didn't quite work just because you aren't a member of the class. But overall, anything else? Big clarifying questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Well, I will say, this is Cynthia Mosley. I will say I like the way you have your playlist set up in Canvas.
Okay.
I've used my playlist in a Google Doc and kind of list my agenda for the day. So this will be a better way to list it, and then they can always refer back to that process. So I like what I saw just a few minutes ago.
Okay. So maybe the flow of it. So a lot of people have asked about announcements and how this teacher might use it. So I think there are lots of ways that you could incorporate announcements with this particular playlist. You could shoot out the direct link to the Canvas module. You could absolutely put the link to your synchronous meeting so that it's easy for students to find. I think a good idea is the agenda, just so students kind of have that. And I know there are several schools that do that. They utilize the announcements for the agenda piece. I kind of have it here, and then I put it on my intro page as well, just for students to be able to see and refer back to. So as we talk today, we're going to use this particular playlist as our reference. Okay, so there are going to be a couple times that we go through kind of this process of evaluation to start us, and then thinking about enhancements at the end. So my first question for you all, there are certain non-negotiables that we've asked all teachers to include within their playlist. And so one of those is the learning target. And so I want you to refer back to that learning target. And I want us to think, is there a measurable learning target? And you can either unmute yourself and shout your answer out, or you can throw it in the chat. But either a yes or a no. Is there a measurable learning target for that particular playlist? And you can take a second to refer back to it if you need to. All right, I'm seeing lots of yeses. So for someone who threw out the answer of yes, why do you think that is a measurable learning target? Why does it fit that criteria for you?
Because it says I can describe what the atoms look like. So if the student can somehow describe to you where those atoms might be in each of the states, then they have fulfilled that. So I can measure it by seeing if they can describe that to me.
Absolutely. If you look at that verb that's included, right, there are a lot of ways that we can observe or gather evidence of whether or not they can describe. So absolutely, going back to that verb and how we have that learning target written, it's very clear and measurable. There are lots of times, or oftentimes we put things in a learning target that aren't really measurable, like the verb, let's think, understand and comprehend. Those are two that I see quite often, and those are two that I've used quite often in the classroom. But when we think about understand and comprehend, there are levels of comprehension and understanding, and those are a little bit vague. And so thinking about how we really write those so that those learning targets are a true guide for our students. All right, so here's my next question then. We answered yes, so we're going to continue on to this journey. So let's continue. Is the learning target written in student-friendly language? Is that a yes, or is that a no? And you can throw it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. We're all about open discussion. Oh man. So I say yes for the most part, with a few caveats, right? So I love what Charlotte said, that it depends on the student's language comprehension. And so when we develop our learning targets, that's why it's critical for us to actually talk to our students about those learning targets. Okay, so that if some of our students do struggle, that if there are words that are embedded in there that they may not be familiar with, that we're talking through what that purpose is. And so also thinking about when we develop those learning targets, and the idea of student friendly may be dependent upon the age of our students as well. What is student friendly for a third grader is going to be a little bit different probably for a sixth or a 12th grader, just because of language acquisition and vocabulary and things like that. So keeping in mind not only if our students are EL and things like that, but also the age of our students as we create some of these. But I tend to agree with most of you. For the most part, there may be some scaffolding needed, but it is written in pretty plain English. I can describe blank.
So excuse me, Ashley, I just want to share some of my techniques that I try to use with my students. Even though I give them directives, I try to leave some open space there for anyone that may not quite understand. So I always put it out there. Do you have questions for me? Are there any questions? Is everybody with me? Those are sort of the things they hear every day. Is everybody with me? Are we all on the same page? Do you have questions for me? And for those that are kind of apprehensive about asking questions, I kind of try to open the door for them to try to come in and speak out and see what's going on with them, so that I'm not leaving anybody behind.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you leave it. So if a student doesn't understand, when we say states of matter, what do you mean? Like, they may think of a state as an actual, like a physical location, like North Carolina is a state. So there may be clarification, you're absolutely right, that needs to be provided for them. And so I think that's a great door to open for your students, so that they can ask those clarifying questions and really understand what that learning target is asking them to do by the end of this lesson. All right. So I think for some of us, if this were our particular learning target, then we might need to tweak it depending on the age of our students, or either the fact that we have ELs in our room or things like that. So making sure that we break that language down and have a conversation. All right. So next question as we go through here. So we have a learning target, not a bad learning target, maybe needs tweaking. But is there a clear product of learning as you look at that playlist? So I'm going to give you a second to go back and look. Is there a clear product of learning? Once you've had a minute to go back and to refer back to that playlist, if you want to drop your answer in the chat, whether you think it's yes or no. All right, so some of you are saying maybe in the discussion, because some of you were not able to access the discussion piece of it. So just in case you want to look and see, I'll pull that discussion topic up for you. For those of you that joined us a little later, that bit.ly is going to take you to a Canvas page, and there is a playlist built as a module. So is there a clear product of learning? All right, so we have some disagreement. All right, so for those of you that say yes, is anyone willing to voice their opinion as to what you think that product of learning is? And if you're someone who thinks no, where is it missing at for you? What's not there? Anyone?
My no is because they're uploading the 3 pictures and we're all going to take turns guessing about yes or no what they are, but it's not telling me that they know what they are. So I'm not seeing them describing to me, which was our goal, the description of the 3 things. I'm just seeing them upload the 3 pictures. So that's why I went with no, because they're not doing that description of them and showing they know what they've uploaded.
All right. Anybody else want to disagree? All right. So then if you're someone who said no, I think we can all agree that maybe the discussion was meant for that. How could that teacher tweak that assignment to make it fit the learning target?
I think if the teacher modifies it so that when the students are guessing, like which picture goes with what, that they're describing then in their guesses, like I think this picture matches the state of matter because, and then they can describe their pictures there. So I think it can be modified to fit it, but it doesn't currently match.
And is that a huge tweak to add that one clarifying sentence?
Super easy to add that.
Right. But you're right. When we look at that learning target and what that learning target actually is asking students to do, we're not far off. This teacher isn't completely off base in her assessment, but with just one little tweak, it could be much more closely aligned so that she got some really good data. Not only are students finding or creating this picture, which might allow some creative outlet for students that like to create videos or draw or whatever the case may be, but adding that written component on top of it is an added layer of data that that teacher might have to be able to target any kind of misconceptions, because we're actually having them to describe, not just on an image that they think represents. So I think you're absolutely right that it could definitely be tweaked to help fit the alignment, right? So then here's my next question. We've looked at the learning targets. We've looked at the product of learning. Is there a clear content component? That's one of our non-negotiables as we talk about a playlist. So when you're going through that module, when you're looking at that module, is there a content component? All right, so most of you didn't click in and actually watch the video, but there is a video there that's meant to be some of that content, right? That students, yep. So some of you are asking, would the content be the video? And so yes, that is the intent for this particular teacher. Is that
But there were two videos, Ashley, the video of you showing how to do the bracket.
not
and
the
the
video
video
of
of
me
the ed
showing how to
puzzle.
do the bracket? That's more for students. So if you'll look at her agenda again. So if you'll look at her agenda, the notes in the video, they're doing asynchronously. And so making sure that students know how to do a brace map in case when we go over it in class, the teacher might demo it here at the beginning, but just in case they don't know what that is, to give them some. But there's also an ed puzzle video, which some of them have talked about as well. And so if you look at the module, and of course this thing wants to keep popping up, there's a States of Matter video there that's embedded. So the intent would be, but here's my next question. So if there is a content component, that teacher is providing a video that teaches the states of matter, is there a processing activity that is paired with it? What do you think? And if you need to go back and take a minute and look at that, look at the agenda, take a minute to explore it again, go back before you answer. But what do you think? All right, so we've got a couple people throwing out some of their ideas of what that processing activity might be. And so one of the things we really want to be intentional about, whether we're face-to-face or we're virtual, is that as we provide students content, we need to also give them opportunities to process that new content. And so I love what some of you are saying in the chat. You're absolutely right. So Ms. Campbell's pointed out that typically in an ed puzzle, there are questions to make you stop and process what that video is giving you. Some people have also thrown out the idea of the brace map. So as students are watching that video, they're completing their brace map notes. If you're not familiar with the brace map, it is just a graphic organizer that takes, that breaks things down into different categories. It's an easy way to kind of categorize and list some different attributes. So the notes, absolutely, and I love what Lee said down here, that the notes are one way to process, but maybe you could even offer a different option. But then Alina also pointed out that this teacher has also tried to build in a debrief with her students, a synchronous time. So they're doing some of that work asynchronous and getting some of that content asynchronously, but there's also a time for students to jump back in and talk through. And some people had talked about maybe a model of the notes and model brace map. That would be a great time for a teacher to share that. This is what my brace map looked at. Let's compare. So Alina, you're absolutely right. That could be part of that processing piece as well. So one more question for you. So Andrea, I think a playlist could be utilized strictly for asynchronous. I also have teachers that blend the two, especially my K-5 teachers. just by the nature of the way their classes are set up, their playlists are definitely woven in and out of asynchronous. So I think it depends on how a teacher sets it up and the purpose of those different learning activities. You could utilize a playlist simply to guide the asynchronous part of learning. So it's all in the setup and how you want to use it. My next question for you, so they do have a content component, some synchronous, some asynchronous. There are some attempts at adding those processing activities, but here's my follow-up question. Are the content delivery and processing activities chunked appropriately for our students? So for that particular assignment, do you feel like it's chunked appropriately? And these are middle school students. What do you think? Could they handle those chunks of time? And Michael, you're exactly right. At the elementary school level, when you teach all subject areas, that playlist might look quite different. So elementary, middle, and high school all might have a different take on it. Since this was a secondary, we went with a subject specific since most of our content, since most of our middle and high school teachers teach one subject at a time, even if they have multiple preps. But what do y'all think? Is it chunked appropriately? Thinking from a middle school lens. Yeah, it definitely might take longer than 5 minutes to get them in. That's why it's definitely a tentative schedule. Agreed, 100%. So I think most of us agree for overall that maybe it is, that we haven't gone longer than 10 or 15 minutes for any particular activity. And we want to keep those chunks of time small for our students. Even our high school students, if you look at brain research and how much information students can store in short-term memory, it's not a lot. And so as they start going through and acquiring this content, we need to be intentional about how we chunk this. And I love what Charlotte said, that there may be the need even for some of our EL or our EC students to chunk it a little more. So as we create playlists in the classroom, our big key critical pieces need to be in place in order for our students to really be able to follow that learning progression. But one of the things that we know is that some of our teachers are ready to step up their game. So this was not a bad example of a playlist. There are definitely, I think most of you, we've hit on some of the coaching points. So if I go through this flow chart and I have a yes in all or most of these areas, then what comes next? Where do I go from there? And so one of the things that you think about For me, one of the next steps is engagement. A lot of people have referred to a playlist as kind of almost like a checklist or things like that. I want it to be much more than that for our students. How do we take these playlists and really begin to create them so that they are engaging lessons for our students? And that's face-to-face or virtual, wherever we happen to be. How do we make them engaging for our students? And so one of the graphics I want to share with you, I want to give you just a second to kind of look it over and look through it. Engagement always doesn't look the same way. And some students that we think are engaged are not, and some kids that we think are not engaged actually are. So I want to give you, I'm going to be quiet so that you can process. But I want to give you a minute to look this over. All right. So I want to get your initial reactions. So if we say one of the next levels of engagement, and not all engagement is the same, nor does it look the same, what are some of your initial reactions to this graphic? Anyone? Things that stood out to you as you looked it over?
One of the things that stands out to me is the diverted attention. I know that's a huge problem right now with a lot of our kids because of things going on in their environment, whereas in the classroom, it was a little bit more constrained. And so I hate seeing that as rebellion because I think it really is always a rebellion type of thing.
So I think that brings up a very valid point. You're absolutely right. That especially in virtual learning, we might have external factors pulling at our students. So one of the comments in the chat was a lot of our activities in school tend to fall in that low attention or low commitment category there.
I think too, back to what was already said, the students can have that diverted attention because there's distraction in their building, in their house, but they may have a higher or commitment. So there's not one for that where they're being distracted, but they really do want to do well. And I think that some of them are missing from the chart.
Yep, I think that could absolutely. It's a good point. And I think about that even within the classroom too. Some of our students who have like ADHD or things like that, they really want to do well and want to perform. They get pulled in a lot of different directions. My husband falls in that category. He, if you ever meet him, you will know he has ADHD, but at the same time, he's one of the most smartest. He's so smart and he's so driven. And so sometimes his attention is diverted a little bit, even when he wants to do well. I love what someone just said, that the relationship to know what is relatable and to make it valid. I absolutely agree. So I want to take just a second. And my question to you, if you look at engagement, and it talks about the student associates the task with result or product that has meaning and value for them. And if so, they're willing to put in more commitment and be more attentive. And so two of the words that stick out to me are meaning and value. And so then how do we create meaningful and valuable experiences for our students? So I want to take a second and I want to give you a moment to kind of talk through some of these pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break us out into breakout groups. And I want us to have a conversation about how we may do that. Okay, so we're going to get ready. I'm going to break you out into a couple groups. And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. So if you want to snap a picture of that question, you can. But if you will, go ahead and join your group. And I'm going to set up a timer. How do we create meaning and value for our students?
Hi, Ashley.
Hey, Kim, how are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. All right. I think we have a few more coming back. So what were some of the things that you guys talked about? You can either throw it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and kind of throw some of the ideas that you and your group talked about. And I was a middle school teacher, so I have really good wait time, just FYI. Because middle schoolers will definitely try to wait you out. So how do we create meaning and value for our students? Okay, so real world experience, connecting it to the real world. What else? I agree.
Making sure it's culturally relevant.
Absolutely. Understanding our students and the culture from which they come from and incorporating that into our classrooms. So relatability and options has come up. All right. Anybody else?
Excuse me, Ashley, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, you're good.
Miss Mosley's lost her connection and she told me to ask you to let her back in, please.
Okay.
I am so sorry for interrupting.
You were good. Look, I taught middle school. I can go with the flow. We are good. Good, good, good. So tailored learning, choice, student interest. Anybody else? Ways to make it meaningful for our students.
Would you think it would be by giving them choices?
Okay? So choice. So there's a lot of research out there around engagement, and there's a lot of ways that you can try to create engaging experiences for students. Like there's a lot. If you Google student engagement, you're going to get a ton of hits. If you start looking at the research, there's a couple things that bubble to the surface quite often. One of those is relevance, and a lot of you hit on that in the chat. Relate the content to the students, or culturally relevant pedagogy. Some of you mentioned relationships and real world experiences. But trying to make it relevant to our students. And what I've tried to do for each one of these is list some of the research kind of behind it, but also some very practical ways around how to do that. You cannot make learning relevant to our students without knowing your students. A lot of you mentioned things like interests and things like that. You have to talk to your kids and get to know them to be able to incorporate pieces like that into your instruction. Which leads me to the next one, which is choice, which Alina, you hit on. Anytime you start looking at how to engage students, choice is one of those things that bubbles to the surface. But one of the things that we know is not all choice is created equal. And so one of the things that we work with our teachers on is how do I create meaningful choice in the classroom? And I think that starts with knowing your students. And so one of the things we talk with our personalized learning lead teachers about is having some of these resources available so that not only do I informally get to know my students, but maybe I survey them. And I gather that information. So then when it comes time to actually plan and utilizing it, I'm not trying to remember what Katie said 2 weeks ago, but I'm going back to some of that data that I've actually collected on students to be able to plan and provide effective choices for my students. We call that building a learner profile. And so one of the resources that I've linked here are some of the learner profile resources, the surveys that some of our teachers have given their students, so that if you're interested in being able to collect that kind of data so that you can create meaningful choice, whether by interest or by learner profile. So some of you talked about that. Let them learn the way they learn best. Providing some of those resources and actually having that data so that you can then go back and look at it when creating some of these experiences. And so you'll see there are different resources there, from learning style inventories, interest inventories, different surveys, and way to collect that data. One of the other pieces when you start looking at engagement is student voice. And a lot of times teachers think they want to think it's this really hard thing to incorporate student voice. But really small steps can go a long way for our students. And so there are some ideas there for you. There are some technology options when you're thinking about how do I include student voice in the classroom. Student feedback is a great way and an easy way to incorporate student voice. Asking students, what activity did you like? What didn't you like? What would you like to see different next time? That's intimidating as an educator, or I will speak for just me and my bubble. That was intimidating for me when I first started doing it. But when my students saw that I actually took their feedback and tried to use that in instruction, it went a long way for engagement. And then voice also includes things like incorporating strategies around accountable talk. So making sure that we give students opportunities to use their voice in the classroom, even in a content related way. And so literature circles, those cooperative learning structures, even in a remote environment, there are ways that we can incorporate those into our playlist and into our synchronous instruction. And so thinking of ways that we can do that can help boost some of the engagement, as opposed to here's a text and let's answer these 5 multiple choice questions every time. I'm not saying that's never appropriate, because obviously there are times when that is, but if that is all students do, then that engagement level is going to obviously be low for them. So thinking about how we begin to build some of these engaging experiences, trying to build in that relevance, choice, or voice. And you don't have to take them all on at once. Choose your area of focus. That's what we always talk about with our teachers, is start small and build. If you think you can get the most bang for your buck from student feedback, then start there. If accountable talk is something you already think you did very well face-to-face, then let's think about how we transition that to a virtual environment. But start small and build on it. We are at the end of our time. I actually went 2 minutes over. I did start 2 minutes late. We did record today's session, so if you want to refer back to it, I'm going to upload it to our Personalized Learning YouTube channel and also add it to our Personalized Learning Canvas course. So if you ever need to go back to it, you can. And for those of you that that weren't here in the beginning with us, I want to make sure that you have access to the slide deck. But before you start logging off, because I know that's the next step, everyone's going to start doing that. I'm going to throw a link in the chat for you to fill out on your way out. And that's just the attendance form. So if you want credit for today, or you're a TA or something like that, and you're using it for stipend purposes or whatever the case may be, I need you to fill out that attendance form. I'm going to stick around for the next little bit. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and I will try to answer them the best way that I can. So I'll stick around for as long as you guys have questions.
Ashley?
Yep.
I came in late because I was in a meeting right before this and we didn't get out until like 15 minutes late.
What do you mean?
So-
Meetings? They still have
But-
meetings, and that's all we do these days.
But how do you get to the slide deck?
Let me throw the link back in the chat for you.
Okay.
There you go, Dana.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. How are you? Are you good?
I am. I'm making it. Barely, but I'm making it.
Well, it's good to see your face.
Yeah, good to see you too, Ashley.
All right. Anybody else? Big questions? Gonna stick around for a bit.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
I was mainly just wondering about the structure of the playlist. Like, so when they're creating the modules, is it okay to have like text headers to break up the different sections to make it clearer for the students to kind of navigate through, or should it just be set up like what was displayed on the example? It's just one big chunk. Does it matter?
I don't think it matters. I think
Okay.
as long as those
All right.
non-negotiables are there and that
Right.
there is consistency for students, so whoever that teacher is, and I'm not saying every teacher has to do it the same way, but within
Okay.
that class, making sure that there's a consistent structure so that when students come to Ms. McCormick's science class, they know this is how we're going to have it structured.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I'm throwing the link to the attendance form back in there again for anyone who may need that. That's the cool thing about playlist is that it isn't a one size fits all. It's going to look different for elementary versus middle and high, and really tailoring that to your students and what works best for them, because they are the consumers of all of this. And so making sure that there's a logical, easy progression for those students as they work through this. Any other big questions? Stick around for a few more minutes just in case. Hey, Allie. Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Ashley. Thanks for a good session.
You were fabulous, as always.
Well, I'm going to take that flow chart and make like a coaching document with like resources.
I like it.
It'd be nice.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know if you like set that up, but Jennifer Fernbach and I were in the same breakout group.
Oh, yeah. It was random. It was random. Random groups.
We had fun.
I was like, sweet.
Tried to mute my toddler during it.
Your toddler was fine.
Girl, you know kids won't bother me.
Where's Ellie?
With her daddy today.
Good.
Hey, Monta, I hope you're having a good year.
Hey, Ashley.
Yep, what you got, Dana?
Thanks,
Okay,
Ashley.
so you're making me want to switch to Zoom now because of these breakout rooms. Because I went in and set up Teams, like channels and Microsoft Teams last weekend for my classes. But it's just not that easy. You can't randomly do it in Teams. Did you randomly do that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you did.
All right. Is it
Teams
too late
being-
to switch? Is it too
Teams
hard
is
to
being
learn?
breakout
Is the learning
rooms.
curve too hard?
No. If you can do Teams, you can do Zoom, is what
Dana,
that's my belief. You can talk to Allie because you know she's
Yeah.
y'all's tech person, but
I recorded my Zoom session, so you can watch it and it'll teach you how to use it.
Would that be too hard of a transition for my kids, you think?
How are they accessing your class right now? Through links or through the Teams calendar?
Both. Through the link at the top or through the team calendar. Either one.
They would only be able to access via link. So they wouldn't be able to access via calendar anymore. I would just give them like a week ahead of time to like prep them and let them know, hey, starting next week, we're going to switch to Zoom. But they should have some class somewhere that they're doing with Zoom, I'm sure.
Now, last week, I had some kids who I've set canvas up so the announcement would show up to the most 5 recent announcements. And all of a sudden, a couple of my kids couldn't get to my link for Microsoft Teams. The announcement wasn't showing at the top of my page for them. And so one of them said that he was going through Teams, and the other one was Kathy Jensen's son, Evan, and she brought him to my room because he was at the school. And I saw on his Chromebook that the announcement wasn't showing, but I checked my settings.
It should still be in the announcements tab, even if they're not at the top of the page.
Yeah,
That's
so-
not new anymore.
Yep, so that's what I told the students. I said, if you don't see my link, either go to Teams and click on the link, or just go to the announcements and you'll see it there, because it was still there.
Yeah.
So, but I may switch to Zoom because I really like those breakout rooms. So those were awesome.
Yeah, so just Deborah, I think for me, I always go back to the standard, and what the standard's asking them to do is where I typically try to find that verb at. Or for me, or for science, I taught science and social studies. Science is a little more cut and dry than social studies was. But I'll go back to the unpacked documents as well to see what they're really asking students to do to pull those verbs. Bloom's has a great list of verbs that I actually, Ms. Campbell was on earlier, and so was Dr. Montague. But we've used those with their staff to help them develop some measurable learning targets. Let me make a note, and I can send you that list.
Okay, I do have one in my classroom, but it has understand, remember.
Yeah.
Things.
Yeah, and I will be completely transparent that I have definitely used those in a learning target before. And then I think Jennifer was with us. We went to an ASCD training up near DC, which was great. And Susan Brookhart was there, and she was doing a session on formative assessment. She was talking about the creation of learning targets, and she brought up the idea of understand and comprehend, and that there are so many shades of meaning and how you can demonstrate the understanding and comprehending part. And so it becomes a little more difficult to for students to really target in on what skill you're asking them to do, which was, I had never thought of it that way before. So that's.
Neither have I, but it makes sense. It's vague.
Yeah, me too. It made sense when I heard her talk about it. And I just hadn't thought about it before until she brought that idea to light. So.
But if you do look up those DOK verbs, you'll see other verbs that go with understand that you can use instead. It kind of gives you groups of wordings that you can use that still work with understand and comprehend.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, ladies. Magnificent.
Well, thank you. You have a good day, Deborah.
Yes, you too. Good to see all of you. And Tracy, y'all are so fortunate to have her again. We are crying at Kennedy that she's gone.
I know.
I missed you, Miss Cochran.
I miss you too. Good to see Allie. Allie can do Zumba for y'all too. She has many, many talents.
Oh, yes.
I don't know that I've done Zumba in a solid 4 years, but maybe it's like riding a bike. These days I'm more like HIIT workouts.
Well, you look great, so thank you.
Good to see you. Alrighty.
Kim,
Well,
that's a
I'm
good
gonna
point
go
about the DOK levels.
Huh?
I was telling Kim that was a good point about the DOK levels and some of those graphics that they have.
All right, friend, I'm gonna go help Lynn with her canvas. So if you need anything, let me know.
All right, will do. All
I'm
right.
gonna go feed the little girl some lunch. She's eating a donut right now. Not the healthiest choice.
That's an excellent.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
All right. Any other big questions for me before I jump off here?
Nope, just telling you goodbye.
Bye, Kim.
Are you okay? You doing all right?
Yeah. Life is just interesting.
Okay.
How are you? Are you good?
Good, losing the hair. I think it's all gonna go this time, so. But we're going through treatments and talking to surgeons. They're not as hopeful as I'd like them to be. But We're
I
still
will
going.
say lots of prayers.
Well, I greatly appreciate it, and I've been praying for you. I hope everything's settling out in your family. I know nothing will be easy from here on out for a while. So
Yeah, it's been an interesting month and a half, but we're close. We're a close-knit family, so.
yeah, I know you are. So take care of each other, and I'm gonna leave. I just wanted to say hello and goodbye.
All right, it was good to see you, Kim.
Good to see you. Bye.
See you. All right. If there are no big questions left, then I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. But if any of you guys have questions, my email is in that slide deck. So please, please, please feel free to email me. Yeah, but it was good to have you all today.